Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. The affordability crisis has many components. Foremost among them is the cost of housing. This is now a full-blown issue in both rural and urban Canada, with Toronto as one of the epicenters. We're fortunate to have as our guest the Honourable Peter Van Loan. He is a prominent municipal planning lawyer and expert and a partner at Aird and Burles Law Firm in Toronto. Peter, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you.
So I guess my first question is, can you, in your own words, describe the nature of the affordability crisis or issue or problem? I don't want to put too much drama in there, but what's going on out there?
Well, it's your show's about economics. And I think when anybody took economics back in high school, they remember that perhaps on the first day, you learn something about supply and demand. It is really as simple as that. They have put in place a tremendous amount of regulation that's made it impossible to deliver sufficient supply to the marketplace. And demand keeps growing up because the population keeps growing, largely because of immigration in the case of the Toronto Census Metropolitan Area and Ontario generally. So it's really simple. Too much demand, not enough supply, prices go through the roof.
So just unpack that for our audience a little bit. What sorts of regulations have been put in place over the last few years that have driven this supply crisis?
There are lots of them, and I'm fond of saying that the housing sector is curious in that it is the most regulated sector of the economy in Canada. You would think that maybe, approving new drugs might be more serious, or perhaps new medical instruments, or perhaps automobile safety. No, the most regulated sector of economy is actually delivering new houses. And I didn't think houses were that dangerous, but they're regulated through provincial plans, through things like the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which I'll talk a lot about in Ontario. They've got similar plans out in British Columbia, for example. And then there are provincial policy statements. There's all kinds of provincial regulations. You have to go through environmental rules and watershed planning. There's official plans at a regional level, official plans at a local level. Then there are zoning bylaws, there's site plan control, there's subdivision control. If somebody has a good piece of land and they want to develop it and it's in the right place, everything's right. And they line up and start the process to get it from, a piece of farmland that's about to be developed to development. It's going to be at least 10 years. A lot of it takes longer than that. And that's all because of the tremendous amount of regulation. And one of the symptoms of it is that in a sector where you think, for the economy to work well, you need competition. Well, in the housing sector, the development sector, increasingly, because it's so complicated, there are fewer and fewer of what you would call small developers, small players. It's become impossible to succeed unless you're very well resourced and very, very sophisticated about cutting through all those regulations to succeed. So you've also got a limited number of players in the marketplace. All these factors are coming together to limit supply and increase prices.
Yeah, so take us through, for the average developer, who do they have to have on staff to wade through all these regulations?
Well, a lot of them have them on staff, but you also still have to go out and get consultants. You have to get lawyers like myself. You have to get land use planners. You have engineers, traffic engineers, servicing engineers that deal with things like sewers and sanitary stormwater. You have environmental scientists, also usually engineers, who deal with some of these stormwater management plans or master environmental surfacing plans, they're called. And I could go on and on with the technical consultants and bore people, but you need a veritable army of these folks, good people in-house who know how to bird dog files and chase them. And the time, effort, energy, all of course adds to the cost as well. Never mind the end troubles of actually building when it comes time to build. Things like you have to do archaeological studies to figure out if anything ever interesting happened on this land before. There's just a whole raft of considerations.
So in terms of what they're facing, has this burden, we got about 30 seconds before we go to break, but this burden has increased, would you say, like maybe exponentially, but increased a lot in the last few years then, is that right?
Well, I worry less about the burden and more about the restrictions on supply. And that's what I'd really like to get onto in our next segment. And that would be what has happened that has made it so hard to build a new home? What have the governments done that have made it impossible for those who want to deliver housing to actually be able to do it?
Well, we are, in fact, going to go to our next segment in just a couple of seconds after a little short break. So stay with us, and we'll be right back with Peter Van Loan. Peter, we were just about to get into some of the particular challenges. We don't have to go this route, but I'm also interested, Toronto specifically, what particular factors are at play in the city of Toronto. But take it wherever you want to take it. What's on your mind in terms of the things that are restraining supply?
Well, the biggest factor is something called the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And not many people know about it, but it is affecting everybody's lives very profoundly. And it was first introduced in 2006 as, the theory was an anti-sprawl document. It was actually deliberately intended to reduce the expansion of cities, to reduce the amount of land being brought in. And by doing that, the new government has tried to roll back some of the most restrictive provisions that were introduced by a succession of Liberal governments up to 2017, 2018. But they still have the essence there. And it has things like limits on the amount of housing, the amount of land that can be included in the settlement area, a very lengthy 10-year process to go through bringing that land into the settlement area through things called municipal comprehensive reviews when they look at the official plans. And the whole ethic is quite clearly to allow less, not more housing, and to encourage it to be in intensified forms.
Right.
So the result is, I'll just give you some statistics that give you a sense of what the result was. Before the growth plan, we were getting housing starts at the rate of one housing start for every 2 new people in population growth.
Okay.
After the growth plan had been in place for about 13 years, that had changed dramatically to now 4.1 people for each new housing start. Well, if you think about what needs to be accommodated there, and this is net population growth, so don't worry, we've taken account of people leaving the country, people dying, all that sort of stuff. So now you have more than twice as many people stuck into each home, and we certainly know that that's not possible, but you also have seen a dramatic shift into the housing mix being almost all apartments. So they're building tiny little apartments, and you're supposed to put 4.1 people in each one. You just can't do it.
Right.
But that is a direct result of these policies limiting growth and forcing it all into apartment growth. So that's one aspect of it. And this mismatch has been happening. As I gave you those ratios and that
Right.
the amount of housing delivered, new housing starts to population growth, you see what's happening. We're at the same time as we're reducing or making it harder to deliver new housing, we're also encouraging more people to come to the country, which is done by the federal government, not by the municipalities. Half of them come to Ontario. 90% of those come to the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So the population growth is actually continuing to get steeper and steeper while housing starts are going further and further down.
But let me ask you, one of the goals of these kinds of policies was densification, that we didn't have to build more pipes and more roads and sewer lines and so on, and you could rely on your own infrastructure stock and build up a little bit or make it more dense in the cities. Is that not a good strategy?
Well, it's a fine strategy, but there's also an element of what I call choice. What kind of society are you going to live in? What do people want? And what we have demonstrated consistently is that 89% of people, purchasers, would prefer to live in a grade-related home, whether it's a townhouse, a semi-detached home, or a detached home. 89%. But what is the market delivering? Consistently, it's delivering about 72% over the past few years of housing starts in apartments. So you have a mismatch. And we as a society are saying, we're going to force you all to live in these apartments in downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver or wherever, but we're not going to let you live in a new home with a patch of grass in the kind of community where you want to raise your family.
Right.
And that's what people want to do, especially when they start forming families. And it's very much an ideological perspective that is behind all this. And I think that's a bad thing for society when we start deciding as a society that, some smart people in a building in a, government somewhere know better what your life should be like and what kind of home you should live in than you can. There's also a question of generational equity.
Right.
Since they have done this, of course, since the growth plan has been in, and we've seen these escalating prices. What has happened is older folks like you and me who have been around in this country for a long time and are well established, we get the benefit of rising real estate values and so on. We're doing just fine. But new young families, new Canadians that have come here seeking the Canadian dream, looking for the opportunity to share and participate in that, have a patch of grass, a place where they can raise their kids and their family, they're locked out of the housing market. And it's becoming, a festering anger with young families and with new Canadians.
Right.
We can't go on building a society where we create such a wide gap in classes, especially when it's cleaved along age and whether you're a new Canadian or not.
We're just going to take a brief break. Peter, hang on. We'll get right back to you. We'll be back after these messages. Peter, one of my previous guests a couple of months ago laid part of the blame on progressive municipal leaders. I think he was looking at the councillors in the city of Toronto, basically saying that they were actually carrying the can for kind of NIMBY thinking about allowing for more housing to be built in the way that people wanted it, and therefore contributing to the housing crisis. Is that a fair assessment? Is that something you've noticed as well?
Well, I think there are different problems with different councils. Some are great, some are bad. Some politicians are great, some are terrible. The real problem here is that decisions aren't being made at the local community level anymore. I think if communities had a greater ability to shape their own, we could accommodate growth in communities that wanted that. We could be a little bit less accommodating in others. But it's this effort to, from the top down, have the province tell everybody how they should grow and where they should grow, which creates kind of some resistance and resentment, but also makes it very difficult to respond to the changing marketplace. One of the things we've had in Ontario that's been very helpful has been a kind of tension where if a municipality is unduly restrictive and unreasonable, you could always go off to the what used to be the Ontario Municipal Board, is now the Ontario Land Tribunal, put evidence on the table and get heard. That's gone now for all these major decisions about urban expansion. It's gone for things like densities and developments in major transit station areas, or conversions from when you have an old industrial site that's never coming back, to be able to convert it. You can't appeal that to the tribunal in order to deliver housing. So a lot of that tension has been taken out of the system, which has further exacerbated it. But at core, I think it's the suburban stuff that's the problem,
right,
that we aren't letting suburbs get built. And they use this dirty word sprawl and say, we're trying to stop sprawl. Well, the fact is we haven't had sprawl in Ontario for decades. We've had very nice, neat, efficient, compact development. You said that one of the principles was, let's have development pay for those pipes in the ground and that infrastructure. Well, we do that in Ontario through the Development Charges Act. It's actually quite efficient. There might be some issues about the long-term maintenance, but there are small tweaks for that. It doesn't justify creating the kind of housing crisis and challenges that are going to hurt a whole generation the way we are now. And the other element of that is, well, it's supposed to be better for the environment because intrinsically getting in a car and going somewhere is bad for the environment. Well, if those folks are the same folks that are saying we now have federal rules in place that are going to be emissions-free automobiles in 2035, not too far off, certainly well before the kind of growth horizons we're talking about in the current exercises on urban expansion, then that shouldn't be a concern. There are ways that technology will solve those problems. And, suburban development, it's actually pretty good in some ways for the environment. It's better. Houses that are built out of wood, much more environmentally friendly than building out of steel and concrete, which are very carbon intensive forms. And as well, you end up with grass, lawns, trees, shrubs.
Sure.
You end up with your own environment where you have carbon emissions being handled, where you have habitat provided for birds, animals. Even if you're in downtown Toronto, you're seeing coyotes and foxes and animals of all type. Up in my neck of the woods in Georgina, we have bears again, which hasn't been the case for 150 years because the farms are largely cash crop instead of having animals and dogs that would intimidate the bears.
Right.
So those arguments, I think, don't really hold water in an era where you have that kind of approach. We have very good sound environmental approaches to development in the suburbs now.
Now I'm going to bring you to of course, I should have mentioned you're a former member of parliament, you're a former cabinet minister in the federal government. So all the political parties had housing policies during this last election. They were major planks in their platforms. What did you make of that? Were there any good ideas there?
Well, the problem for the federal parties, and I understand why they were doing it, it's because the polls were and focus groups were telling them exactly what I said. There's this anger bubbling up among people that are locked out of opportunity, particularly new Canadians and younger families. And they're trying to address that. But housing is overwhelmingly a matter of provincial and local jurisdiction.
Right.
So there's very little the federal government can do. So they talked about it. They had some tinkering policies. None of those would make a dramatic difference. The only one that would make a dramatic difference would be to massively reduce immigration. And there are all kinds of very good economic reasons why we don't want to do that.
Right.
Canada's economic growth has been, to a large degree, driven by population growth. We're experiencing right now the kind of labor shortages that people have been worried about for some time as older folks like you, Tony, begin to retire. And younger folks are smaller in number, so they're not in the workforce. So we're getting this top-heavy population. We got a whole bunch of old retired folks who want to be supported by young people who aren't there.
I'm not retired yet, and we do have to go to another break. So we'll come back for the final segment with our guest, Peter Van Loan. Please stay with us. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, talking about housing affordability with the Honorable Peter Van Loan. He is a prominent municipal lawyer and planning expert, as well as partner at Aaron Burles Law Firm. Peter, I guess this is the part of the program where you say, okay, I'm going to give you the magic wand. You've got all the power to change the system. What really has to be done? And I guess really, what can be done?
Well, thinking of a place like Ontario, I would say scrap the growth plan, get the province to a large degree out of the business and return planning back to local municipalities, let them shape their communities the way they want, and then restore some of that tension in the system so you can have hearings where you can appeal to a tribunal and that decisions can be made on good evidence on what's right and what's wrong. So that decisions are made in the first instance, politically by what matters locally, but it can't be done in an unaccountable way. They know that what they do has to be, they're going to be judged on it. They're going to be judged in a tribunal, and they're going to have to justify it. And that would be, for me, the magic wand. But to simplify it, it's supply. We need more supply, and we need more supply in a fashion that lets people have choices. I think one of the reasons, my family came here is I'm Estonian by background, refugees from the Soviet occupation of Estonia. And one of the reasons why this was a country of choice was because it was a place of opportunity, where my grandfather, an agronomist, my grandmother, a lawyer, could come here, go to work in a paper factory in Riverdale and on a order desk at Sears and get a home and become part of that Canadian dream and enjoy it and have that freedom that they would be denied elsewhere, including the freedom of choice about where to live and how to live and where to raise families. And we have to have that. That's a critically important value in making Canada such an attractive and desirable society. And when we start substituting the decisions of, really smart planners or really smart provincial bureaucrats for what people want to choose about where they live, I think that's when the society starts going in the wrong direction. So increase supply, restore freedom of choice in housing, give people those opportunities, and especially focus on opportunity for the younger families looking to get ahead. For the broader economy, this sector is critically important, but it's also critically important for attracting talent. If we can't find a place for young families of talented, engineers, scientists, communications experts, whatever the field may be, if we can't find homes for them to raise their families, we're going to lose that talent to other places. And when we lose that talent to other places, our whole overall economy is going to suffer. And make no mistake, we're in a global competition for talent. But the most important thing they're looking for in a day and age when we can work remotely increasingly, when we can go anywhere we want, is quality of life. And for many people, quality of life means a nice home and a nice environment and a safe neighborhood where the kids can play on the street with their friends, where they can go to school safely without having to be driven, where they can enjoy parks and recreation and all the fiber of what a good community is. And if we tell everyone, forget it, you're living in a box in the sky in downtown Toronto, we're going to lose that, and we're going to lose that economic competitive edge when it comes to people.
We've got just over a minute left, Peter. Just curious, has COVID sort of help bring some of these issues to light or to focus in on this? Has that been helpful in a paradoxical sense?
Like so many other parts of our society, a lot of folks are in denial. They want to pretend everything's going to go back to normal. But there's no doubt that the principle of people, if you want to have more people working at home, which means less commutes and better for the environment, and that's where people want to go, they actually need more space. So you're going to have to design homes with offices or apartments with offices. Well, that's not the model that all our planning has been based on. And, raises big questions about all these investments in transit. Should those investments be going into other things that better serve that kind of a community? Because, as I said, it comes back down to the people. There's a guy named Joel Cock, and I got a lot of time for him. He did a thing called The New Geography, a book he wrote about, 20, 25 years ago. I used to use it teaching at U of T. And he said that talent, those people are going to be looking for quality of life. They're no longer tied to the city that's on the lake, on the river, wherever. They can go wherever they want. We got to win that talent by giving them the housing they want.
We're going to have to leave it at that. Peter Van Loan, thanks for joining our program. Very interesting to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much, and a pleasure being with you.
Some very interesting insights from Peter Van Loan about housing, why we have this crisis, what can be done, and how we can get more supply. His answer, more supply. We need that for our young people, and we need it for everybody. So great to have him on for his insights, and thanks for joining us. It was a great program. Thanks for watching.